Hi everyone, I'm Joshua Thomas, and I'm actually going to give you a movie review today. It's going to be Star Wars The Last Jedi, but this is the Road Express, so I'm going to talk about some board games, some Star Wars board games along with it. Yeah, I have a couple of Star Wars games. So let's get right to it. I have seen Star Wars The Last Jedi 2 times now, and I've got to say that I definitely am glad I went to see it a second time. I know a lot of people are like, oh, why are fans and all these people going to see it multiple times? Well, I can safely say that the second time I was able to enjoy the movie more and enjoy feeling how the characters felt inside while they were feeling it, as opposed to after they felt it and, after their thought processes were revealed to the audience. It happens several times to where we're like, oh, that's what they were thinking. Oh, that's what the plan was. I get it now. So, and I'm also going to address a lot of things that the fans maybe didn't like, or that the people who hated the show, these are the reasons that they hated the show, the movie. So here is a list I've got right here, and then intermittently we'll also talk about these games that we've got involving the Star Wars universe, and who knows, you might be compelled to go out and try out one of these games yourself. Pew pew, I'm Poe Dameron, pilot for the Resistance. Fair warning, spoilers ahead. Pew, 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 pew. The first thing that we're going to address is the hyperspace tracking chase, blah, blah, blah. Why didn't they just all sorts of things? This is one of the things that the audiences that hated the movie really tore apart, and that is, if they could track them through hyperspace and all this kind of stuff, why didn't they just jump in ahead of them and blah, blah, blah. And I'm going to just quickly say that we really don't know how hyperspace works. I mean, you've got, the good guys running from the bad guys. Let's say they need to go from Kashyyyk to somewhere else, and they jump, and these guys are like, oh, we're tracking you, haha, we've got you on a tiny string. But we don't really understand Star Wars physics, and we don't understand the physics of hyperspace, regardless of whether you read something on Wikipedia or not. So if this ship jumps into hyperspace and jumps out and this ship follows it, well, coming from a military standpoint, there's probably a lot of safety precautions that come into it, and you're probably still sitting there saying, you're just trying to justify why the movie did what it did. Why not bring in more ships? Why didn't General Hux and Kylo say, bring in the ships from the other system and we'll cut them off? You see, the Empire, or the First Order now, had so many more ships, and, well, the rebels were sure to be doomed. It was just a matter of time. It was just a matter of waiting them out, letting them die a slow, horrible death, letting them see their own fate behind them, and not calling in more ships to cut them off. Well, that was boiled down to one word: hubris. Quite possibly the biggest flaw that the Imperials have is that they are all-powerful, and that this tiny band of rebels and their measly ships aren't going to be able to outrun them. They've got them. This is it. And they're just enjoying sitting back and waiting for them to die. And if that's not an acceptable excuse for you, well, then I can't really explain it for you. If you loved the movie, you're gonna find reasons why this worked or why things happened the way they happened. And if you hated it, you're gonna find reasons why it should have been different, or why it changed the Star Wars universe forever and in so many ways, and it's just rewritten the rule book. Let's move on to something I enjoyed, especially from a gaming standpoint, and that is the TIE Silencer. That is Kylo's TIE fighter that he flew in the battle to try and destroy the rebel ship This is it right here. This is a model of it from the Star Wars XWing Miniatures game. And an interesting note, they actually got the scaling wrong, according to a lot of people. Here is the box that it comes in. It's actually bigger than it's supposed to be, according to scales from, the measurements on Wikipedia, if you believe everything you see on Wikipedia. So just to give you guys an example of how this ship stacks up against others, this is a very similar size to Darth Vader's TIE fighter. His a TIE Advanced. Not exactly the same, but very similar to it. I've got a First Order TIE right here, which is the same size as a normal TIE fighter. And in the movie, it was hard to tell exactly how big this one was in comparison to this one, but this does appear to be a little bit bigger. A lot of X-Wing Miniatures fans are arguing that this ship should be smaller to fit on the small base better, instead of fitting on, say, a large base, like one of the large ships that comes for the game. I'll see if you can get a closer look at it right here. That's it right there. That's the Ghost from Star Wars Rebels, the TV show. So, that's X-Wing Miniatures game. And the TIE Silencer, definitely going to be a fun ship to fly. I loved that scene, back to the movie, where Kylo, you can see that inner struggle of him not wanting to kill his mother, Princess Leia, or General Leia. Blowing up Poe's ship. Oh, by the way, Poe's ship, for a size comparison right there, because you never see them in the same shot. But in X-Wing Miniatures, you can fight these two ships and see who is the better pilot. So, there is that. Let's move on to something that a lot of fans really didn't like, Leia Poppins. Yep. So, there's the whole scene where the other TIE fighters shoot the bridge out and all of the leaders die, including Admiral Akbar and we think Princess Leia. She's floating out in space, it looks like ice crystals are forming all around her, and then all of a sudden she wakes up and she force pulls herself back into the ship. And yes, she does force pull herself back into the ship, she doesn't pull the ship towards her. A lot of people just didn't like the way that looked, and well, we've never seen someone use the Force in the vacuum of space before. We just haven't seen it yet. So, in watching the movie for the second time and knowing what's about to happen and just being able to just sit back and enjoy the beauty of the shot, number one, it is a very beautiful shot. Leia, I'm okay with Leia being a Force user. In fact, in the Legends universe and in the current universe, the Disney universe, Luke Skywalker does spend some time training his sister in the ways of the Force. And she's what we would consider a Force adept, someone who is not a Jedi or a Sith, but can still use Force abilities. And then, of course, if Yondu can do it, then why not Leia? So, while yes, it did have this kind of Mary Poppins look to it, it was still very beautiful. A lot of people thought that Carrie Fisher, that should have been Princess Leia's dying scene right there, but her story had to continue, and to help bring about some points for the main characters of the show. Of course, we're talking about the Porgs and those giant racing horse aliens with the sad eyes, and the ice foxes, or the crystalline creatures. I think that The Last Jedi, I was worried when I saw the trailers. I was like, oh no, they're gonna add this cutesy fartsy critter into it, and it's just going to be overdone, but Star Wars The Last Jedi had perfect Porg proportions as far as I'm concerned. There were only a couple scenes where those animals did anything remotely significant, and they were just kind of comic relief, and they weren't overused. Those racing sad-eyed pony things, I don't remember what they're called. I'm sure I'll have the name right here when this video airs. They were fine as far as I was concerned, but I'll get to that later. And then the Crystal Foxes, they were fine too. So yeah, cute critters, I was okay with in Star Wars. Now let's move on to another topic that a lot of the die-hard Star Wars fans really hated about this movie, and that is Luke has changed. He's not the hero that we remember in Return of the Jedi. In fact, he's far from it. And a lot of people say, that's not Luke. Well, yeah, that's not Luke 30 years ago. But today, after he has aged 30 years, yeah, that's him. I've been married for 4 years, and I can safely say that I've changed a little bit since I was married. And I haven't had nearly the traumatic experiences that Luke Skywalker has had in my life. Nowhere close. I've been pretty fortunate. I mean, I got this board game, intercut board game stuff, Star Wars Rebellion. All right. And I'm actually okay with the way that Luke changes in this movie. In fact, if you think about it, anyone can change that dramatically in 30 years. 30 years is more than enough time. And when you are the sole surviving Jedi in the entire universe, and you go to train your first school of brand new Jedis, and it fails miserably, yeah, that's a big blow. And in fact, if it didn't affect Luke that severely, it would have meant that he didn't care. The fact that he cared so much about this Jedi Order is why, when it was just destroyed in front of him, it crushed him. It forced him to run away, to look for that island, to live out his dying days there. And then when Rey comes in and says, hey, train me to be a Jedi, no, he doesn't want to do that. He doesn't want to feel that failure again, and especially when he feels that force power in her, and that untamed force power that doesn't quite know where to go to the light or the dark. He's afraid of it, and rightfully so, but he's also learned from his past in that he's not just going to try and murder her. But we'll get in more in that later. So yeah, if you think about it in terms of Luke Skywalker being a human, not just some superhero like Superman, yeah, he's gonna have these character flaws, and he's gonna be crushed, and he's gonna turn into this hermit that is almost reminiscent of Yoda. Next on our agenda, Holdo hides her plans from Poe. Why does she do it? Why doesn't she just tell Poe and then none of this stuff happens? People see this as a huge plot hole, and that if she had just told him, things would have gone better. Well, it wasn't her job to tell him. First off, in seeing the movie the second time, I was just able to sit back and just really analyze that. Poe didn't deserve to know. We see Poe Dameron as one of the main characters. We know he's one of the heroes of the story. But Holdo and Princess Leia, they don't know he's the hero of this story. They are living in that universe and trying to survive. If this is coming from my military background as well, if I was in the bridge of some starship and this angry guy who had just been demoted to captain strolls in and says, I deserve to know everything, and blah, 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 and is just gung-ho, yeah, I'd kick him out too and not tell him about the secret plans that we've got going on. He's a hothead. He doesn't need to know. It's not his job to know, and he doesn't have to be in on that secret in order for the plan to work. So him not being in on the secret does cause it to backfire in a huge, huge other side story of love and Finn and Rose and all that kind of stuff. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But, so yeah, Poe didn't deserve to know the secret plans that were happening. He's a starfighter pilot, and it wasn't his job. So, in The Force Awakens, we've got Finn and Rey, and it seems like maybe they'll be the love interest. throughout this series, but then Rose comes along and we start to realize that, okay, maybe that's not going to happen. A lot of people who didn't like the movie felt that Rose was one of the weaker characters. Possibly she was, who knows. I know that perhaps her story and Finn's story probably weren't my favorite, but in order to have made it better, they would have had to devote more time to that story. And this is where, coming from my writing point of view, that would be difficult to do, because this is one of the first Star Wars movies where they've done things a little differently. In almost all the other Star Wars movies, there are two storylines. Like in A New Hope, there's Luke's storyline, and then there's Princess Leia's storyline, and they intermingle towards the end. Then in The Empire Strikes Back, you've got Han and Leia's storyline and Luke's storyline, and that continues on in Return of the Jedi. In The Force Awakens, you've got all these storylines that are kind of intermingled, but it's mainly about Finn and Rey. So that's the focus of The Force Awakens. And then comes along The Last Jedi. You've got three separate storylines trying to be supported in one movie, which is not an easy thing to do. You've got Rey's storyline, you've got Finn and Rose, and then you've got Poe's storyline, and they're all trying to have a beginning, middle, and end in this exact same area. Not something easy to do, and having 2 hours and 30 minutes or something like that to do it in, that's still even not enough time. So in order to have made their storyline better, they would have had to have gotten rid of one of the other storylines, in my opinion. Then there's also Phasma. Oh man, she's back. She was totally wasted in that movie, and I would agree with that. And having her more involved in Finn's storyline, and as opposed to showing up in maybe 2 or 3 scenes, and then Finn fighting her really quickly and her dying in an explosion. Maybe she dies in this explosion, who knows? I would like to think that she does. Having her be Finn's main villain throughout the movie instead of just in a couple of scenes would have been much more powerful. Maybe it would have made the movie longer. Maybe they considered it and they said, you know what, that would take away from Rey's story. Who knows? But it is the weaker of the 3 stories. I feel Rose perhaps didn't even need to be a character in there, and if they had not had Rose's character in there and instead had Phasma in there more, that may have made for a more powerful storyline and a more powerful conclusion for Finn's story. I don't know. But I do think that when I first saw the movie, I just didn't like Finn and Rose's storyline at all. And then when I sat through it the second time, I was a little bit more okay with it, but still, things maybe could have been more awesome. I mean, Finn almost sacrificed himself to save the rebels, and maybe it would have saved them. Maybe it would have doomed them to a different fate. Maybe the Empire would have just bombarded that area until there was literally nothing left. We'll never know. I can safely say that in writing, having some kind of countdown or bomb explosion or poison in the drink adds a level of suspense, adds this level of, oh my god, what are the heroes going to do now? And this has happened in Star Wars movies before, in the Return of the Jedi and A New Hope, when they had the Death Stars. The Death Stars themselves were a countdown in which the rebels had before they were going to be just completely obliterated. But those were shorter countdowns, and those countdowns didn't carry the entire movie. They only carried the last portion of the movie where the tension was heightened and it was coming towards a screeching, crashing end, and they just had to rely on luck and faith and the Force to get them out of those situations. So for this countdown, this 2-hour-long countdown of waiting for fuel to run out, didn't work so much for me, but I was still willing to forgive the movie because of all the other amazing things that happened in it. Rey and Luke and Kylo's storylines, oh my god, they were amazing. Their storylines were by far the best and most powerful that I've seen in recent Star Wars movies. Well, maybe regardless of Rogue One. But still, I just loved Mark Hamill's performance as Luke Skywalker. I thought it was powerful both times that I watched it. I thought it was amazing, the tension between Rey and Ben Solo, or Kylo Ren, whichever you want to call him. The conversations that they had, I almost felt like they were a little cheesy when I first saw it because, oh, they're talking through the Force. But it grew on me, and I was okay with it because they were using Force projection, which is not the first time something like that's been done in the grand Star Wars universe. So they were talking on planets several parsecs away, or I don't know, light years away, whichever. And so he was like, oh, hey, I'm over here on this planet. Oh, hey, I'm over here on this planet, and we're all talking. Yeah, that's really great. It was very powerful. It was the juxtaposition of their different environments that they were in were amazing, and I think if you see the movie again, you can start to notice that. It was amazing to see the growth of all three of these characters and the twists that were going to happen. Everyone thought that this was going to be a almost shoot for shoot of The Empire Strikes Back, and they pulled something very shocking on us, which were all the twists. They sped ahead to Return of the Jedi, where, oh no, our Jedi hero, Rey, meets the evil Emperor, Lord Snoke, on his super weapon, and then they have an amazing lightsaber battle, even though who they were battling didn't have lightsabers, but still, it was amazing. Lord Snoke is killed, betrayed by his Sith learner, and it was just amazing. You thought that Kylo was going to turn back into Ben Solo, and instead, what you realize is that he just did all of that for his own personal gains. Rey was so hoping that he was going to reach out and grab her hand, and it was just, come to the light side, and it just didn't happen. It was a twist that I didn't see coming, and I don't think anybody saw coming, and I do think that Lord Snoke is dead. There's some fan theories already out there that he's not dead, that he was force projecting himself into the throne room unbeknownst to any of them, but no, Snoke is definitely dead, and I'll get into that a little bit later. But let's talk about a little bit more about this game that we've got here. If you are one of those fans who absolutely hated these new movies, well then Star Wars Rebellion might be for you, and it might not be, because you can reenact the destruction of Alderaan. You can have the Death Star fly in, say, oh, don't know if I like these rebels. Okay, Alderaan's gone, let's move on. Do. You can reenact the chase on Tatooine. Not really, but I mean, you can attack a shuttle and destroy it and all that kind of stuff. Then, if you want to have the Battle of Hoth, go for it. Have the Battle of Hoth and destroy the rebels' hidden base and force them to move. This game gets so much more complex than that, and you can actually kind of rewrite your own Star Wars original trilogy story. But it's a lot of fun, and there's also a Rogue One expansion to the game as well. But back to the movie. You've got this field of white reminiscent of Hoth, and then you've got this crimson red mineral underneath that gets kicked up by everything. The planet itself is bleeding. It's almost reminiscent of one of these Chinese martial arts movies about the samurais or something, where there's beautiful usage of color and the imagery of the wounding of the planet and the rebellion by the evil empire. First Order. It's something that's very moving if you just sit back and enjoy the look of it and the looming Imperial walkers coming in. One thing I didn't like about it was that those little skiffs where they were using to try and fight, hey puppy, hey, this is my dog here, they didn't accomplish anything except getting destroyed. And yeah, this is kind of the turning point for Poe's storyline, because instead of in the beginning where Poe sacrifices so many lives in order to destroy a ship, this time Poe turns around and says, no, we don't need to senselessly lose our lives, everyone retreat. This was Poe's chance to not be the hotshot, not be the guy that goes in and tries to destroy everything he can. And Finn goes on and tries to sacrifice himself, and then Roses it up. And yeah. I loved the battle between him and Kylo, how short it was, and the hints were there that he was indeed a Force projection in his own self. A lot of people didn't like that he died due to this Force projection, but if you remember early on when this Force projection first happens between Kylo and Rey, Kylo briefly mentions that no, Rey couldn't be doing this, this would kill her, because Force projection across several light years, across several solar systems, is a lot to put on oneself. This is another reason why I believe that Snoke is dead, because if he himself had been Force projecting himself for that long amount of a time, he probably would have died too, because I don't think he is any stronger than Luke Skywalker. But when we first see Luke on that salt planet, that mineral planet, we see that he looks younger, his face has been trimmed, and his hair's not gray. And I get the feeling that the reason he looks like that is because that's how he remembers himself the last time he looked in a mirror. Because he's been on that planet for a long time, and I imagine he's kind of thinks he still looks like that. But moving on, there are even hints that this is a Force projection during the battle between Kylo and Luke Skywalker. If you pay attention, when Kylo moves his foot across the salt, it moves the salt out of the way, whereas Luke kind of steps around and the salt doesn't move. And you see a couple good shots where you see his feet move, and it almost looks like he's not quite there, not quite touching the salt, and that the salt isn't interacting with him in the same way that it interacts with Kylo, which is another piece of beautiful imagery that I thought they added to that scene. So I've given you a lot of food for thought on Star Wars: The Last Jedi, and what are my final thoughts on it? Well, after having seen it twice and being able to analyze it and get thoughts from a lot of other people, I like it. It changes the way that we have to view this movie and this new trilogy. It broke the mold of being a carbon copy of The Empire Strikes Back, which is something that needed to be done. I don't hate The Force Awakens. In fact, I enjoyed that movie too. After seeing The Last Jedi and The Force Awakens twice in theaters, I do have to say that I believe I do like The Last Jedi. I really enjoyed it. Even though the flaws that I talked about earlier, maybe you can find flaws in all the movies. I still liked Rogue One better than Episode 7 or 8, if that's any consolation. So, and I do look forward to seeing what happens to Rey. Oh, and Poe saying, "I know," to Rey. Kind of a hint that maybe they're going to be the love interests in the next movie because, well, now Finn has Rose. So that was my review of Star Wars: The Last Jedi and a brief look into some of these other games. Now, I do want to mention some things about these games. Star Wars X-Wing Miniatures requires a core set to play, and you're definitely going to end up investing a couple $100 minimum into this game, because all of these ships that come for the game are expansions that you buy to add flavor and add some variety to your game. This amazing board game that I've got here, where we've got a hidden rebel base that has all sorts of miniatures, and you can add more miniatures to the game and more buildings and structures. That is Star Wars Rebellion, and that is going to cost you a pretty penny. This is an expensive board game at roughly $100. But this is one of the most popular board games in the world right now. It's in the top 10 on Board Game Geek, and it is nicknamed Star Wars in a Box because you do feel like you're either in control of the evil Empire or of the hopeful band of rebels. So you can, like I said, blow up planets. It doesn't have to be Alderaan that you can blow up. You can blow up several planets in a game. You can thwart the Empire. The Empire can find your rebel base, and you can escape and create another rebel base. But do be warned, this is a heavy game, both in the manual and in the amount of time it takes to play it. But look at those manuals there. Wonderful artwork right there. So if you're much more casual, I'm going to have to recommend that you play Star Wars Risk. I don't have the game, but I have heard that it is one of the more enjoyable versions of Risk, and it's not just a carbon copy of Risk, it is molded around the second Death Star battle. So thank you for checking out my review of Star Wars The Last Jedi and of some Star Wars games that might help you keep your craving for more Star Wars down until 2 years from now when they have Episode 9. Thanks for watching, and be sure and check out more Felroad Express videos. Bye!